South is this place steeped in mystery. It is a very supernatural area. And I would say it's one of, if not the most haunted areas in the United States. Now, this story comes out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. There was this young man who said that him and his friends, they used to know of this place outside of town. And they said it was this cave. And a lot of people in the area took to calling it the Cave of No Return. And he said they called it that because so many people had disappeared in this area. And one night, him and his buddies, they decide we're going to go out to the Cave of No Return. And so they all head out to this area and they hike through the woods. They get out to the cave. And he said immediately, as you stepped into this area where the cave was, there was just this overwhelming feeling of dread. And he said just something didn't feel right. So he said as they were kind of exploring around the outside of this cave, he noticed up on this like cliff, there was a Native American man staring at him. Now at the time, he didn't say anything to his friends. He just kind of ignored it. But as they were walking back from this cave, he asked his friends, "Hey, did you see that Native American guy? Like, wasn't that kind of strange?" And none of his friends knew exactly like what he was talking about. So later that night, he goes home and he goes to bed. And he said he woke up in the middle of the night to just this really eerie, still, quiet feeling. And he said, like he couldn't hear his fan in his room. He couldn't like hear any sort of noise. And he said all of a sudden he looked out his window and he's seen these two bright yellow eyes just staring at him. And he said he started to hear kind of like this weird whistling sound. So he screamed for his parents. They come in his room. They look around, out his window. They don't see anything. The next night, right, he goes to bed. And he said, once again, he wakes up and there's just this really quiet, eerie feeling in the room. And he said all of a sudden, over by the foot of his bed, there is that Native American man he's seen at the caves. And he said he was just standing there, staring at him. And all of a sudden, he pointed. And the next thing he knew, he said he realized he wasn't in his room. He was in that cave. And he said he got up and walked back through the woods and like made his way home, but he could not figure out like how he ended up in that cave. The next night, he goes to bed, wakes up in the middle of the night, and he said, he just had this really eerie feeling again. And once again, standing next to the foot of his bed, there's that Native American man. And he once again points at him. And he said the next thing he knew again, he was back at that cave. And he said, but this time, as he was in the cave, he heard that whistling sound again. And he said he looked off into the dark. He said he sees these two yellow eyes just staring at him. And he said out of the darkness steps this tall, half man, half dog, hairy looking creature. And he said it's just sort of snarling at him. So he gets up, he takes off running through the woods, and he said this thing was chasing him. He slips, he falls, this thing gets within a couple feet of him. And he said he just remembered he had this cross on that his grandma gave him. So he took the cross from under his shirt and he pulled it out and just like held it up towards this thing. And he said whatever he did and whatever this was, it got scared and it like ran away off into the woods. And he said after that, he never experienced it again and he would never go back to those caves. Now, this next story takes place in southern Louisiana. There was this hunter named Dave. And Dave said, he would often take his boat out through the bayou, go to this spot that was kind of like an island, and he would hunt wild pigs. So he said this particular day, he went out on his boat and he goes to a spot where he would normally hunt. And he said every time he would get to this area, it was surrounded by the swamp. And he said in that swamp, he would always see this 12 to 13 foot alligator just staring at him and watching him as he would get off the boat. And he said this particular time he gets there, he didn't see the alligator. He gets off and he starts hunting. Well, he said he was out there for like several hours. It started to get dark and he decided he was going to make his way back home. So as he goes back to his boat and he starts getting in his boat, he said he heard a woman's voice saying, help me, please help me. And he said as he looked off into the distance on the shore of this island, he said there was this beautiful woman in a white gown, barefoot, just laying up against like the water. And he said he got out of his boat, he ran over to her. And he said when he looked directly at her, she had eyes that were exactly like an alligator. And he said, instantly he knew something was wrong with this person. So he just turns off and starts going towards his boat. This woman starts chasing him, except she's on her hands and knees with her hands turned backward, walking like all contorted. She chases him to his boat. He gets in and he takes off. And he said as he was going away, he looked back and he said in the water he could see the eyes of that very large alligator. And he said still to this day, he felt like that woman was the alligator. This last story takes place in Atlanta, Georgia. There was this young man named Marcus. Marcus said he was driving back from a friend's and he had to go through kind of this wooded area. And he said as he was going around the corner, he sees something up ahead in the road. He said he slowed down because there was an old woman standing in the middle of the road facing the opposite direction. So he stops his car and he gets out and he says, "Hey, ma'am, are you all right?" She doesn't say anything. He walks a little closer. "Hey, ma'am, are you okay?" And he said all of a sudden this old woman turned around, and when he seen her face, he said, it was like her jaw was kind of dropped down. Her teeth were, kind of bent and twisted. She had these dark black eyes and this long gray hair. And he said she just let out a scream. So he took off, ran back into his vehicle, and he closes the door. He said all of a sudden this woman ran at his car, jumped on the hood, and just starts hitting on the hood of the car. He said the next thing he knows, she climbed up on top of the car and he can't see her anymore. So he starts the car, he takes off, starts driving, and he says he heard like a thump, like she fell off. So he thought, okay, maybe she's gone now. Well, he said as he was driving, all of a sudden he sees her face pop down in front of the vehicle, and she just starts screaming. And instantly, he said he slammed on his brakes. She got up and she took off running into the woods. And he said still to this day, he does not like driving in that area.